Have you ever had a moment where you were in the middle of a perfectly valid point and someone just cut you off? Not rudely necessarily. They did not seem angry, they just stepped in and took over. And the strange part is, what you were about to say was actually good. The idea was solid, the observation was relevant, but somehow none of that mattered. So why does it happen? Most people assume it comes down to the other person. They were impatient, they were rude, they like the sound of their own voice. And sometimes that is true. But there is another explanation, one that has less to do with the person interrupting and more to do with what happens inside a listener's brain in the seconds before they jump in. Here is where it gets interesting. The listener is not waiting for your conclusion. They are constantly predicting it. While you're talking, their brain is running a background process, trying to model where your sentence is going, what your point will be, and roughly when you will get there. This happens automatically. It is not a choice. The brain is essentially filling in the shape of your thought before you have finished drawing it. Now, when that process works well, the listener tracks you comfortably. They follow the thread, they wait. But when the signal breaks down, when the path of your sentence is unclear, or when the destination keeps getting pushed further away, the brain gets restless. And that restlessness has to go somewhere. Sometimes it goes to distraction. Sometimes it goes to an interruption. What most people miss is this: an interruption is rarely just rudeness. It is often a failure of signal. The listener's brain lost the thread, made a prediction, and decided it was close enough to act on. They do not even realize they are cutting you off from something valuable. From their perspective, they already know where you were going. They just got there first. This is why the setup length matters so much. Imagine someone in a meeting saying, "So I was thinking about this last week and I mentioned it to a colleague and she had an interesting reaction and it made me revisit something I read a while back and I think it connects to what we were discussing earlier, and the reason I bring it up is..." By this point, almost every listener has already constructed their own version of your point. Some of them have already decided whether they agree, and a few of them are going to say something before you finish, not because they are disrespectful, but because their brain told them the setup was over. Here's a useful way to think about it. Listener attention is like a loading bar. When you start talking, it begins filling, but it does not fill indefinitely. It fills up to a certain point, and then it starts to drain if nothing concrete arrives. The longer the setup, the more attention gets spent before the actual point even shows up. Dale Carnegie observed something related to this when he wrote about the habits of people who talk too much. He noticed that people trying to persuade others often talk more than anyone else in the room, which is precisely the wrong approach. The more you fill the space, the less the listener is tracking your argument. They start waiting for a gap instead of waiting for your conclusion. The solution is not to talk less in general, it's to move the point earlier. When you lead with the core observation and follow it with context, the listener's brain locks onto the destination first. It knows where you're going. And knowing that makes it much easier to stay patient while you explain the reasoning behind it. The structure flips from long runway before takeoff to here is where we are landing and here is how we got there. There's also a subtler issue, which is clarity of direction inside individual sentences. When a sentence starts and the listener cannot tell what kind of claim it is building toward, they start filling in the blanks more aggressively. But when the early part of the sentence already signals the shape of what is coming, whether it is a contrast, a conclusion, a question, or a specific observation, the listener relaxes. The brain gets its prediction early and stops competing with you. Think about it like road signs on a long drive. When signs appear regularly and tell you what is ahead, driving feels manageable. When signs disappear and you have no idea how far the next town is, even a relatively short stretch starts to feel unbearable. Sentence structure works the same way. Now, this does not mean you need to be blunt or strip your ideas down to single statements. It means the listener needs orientation. A sentence can be long and complex and still be easy to follow if its early words point in a clear direction. The problem is not length, it is signposting. Carnegie also described the effect of vivid, concrete demonstrations and how they hold attention in a way that long-winded explanation simply does not. He described a salesman who used a quick chalk sketch and another who physically stacked evidence in front of a client. These are extreme examples, but the principle behind them applies to ordinary conversation. Something concrete and immediate pulls the listener into your thought, rather than leaving them to float outside it, filling in their own version. There is one more mechanism worth understanding. When people do talk too much in a single turn, something subtle happens to the social dynamic. The listener starts to feel like the conversation has stopped being a conversation. It is starting to feel like a broadcast. And once that feeling sets in, the brain registers the scene differently. It starts looking for a re-entry point rather than listening for a conclusion. The interruption becomes almost reflexive, not hostile, just an attempt to restore balance. This is partly why asking questions during a longer point can actually protect your airtime. Not constantly, not artificially, but a genuine question folded into your reasoning invites the listener back in. It signals that this is still a conversation, not a monologue. And people who feel included are far less likely to cut in. So when you put it all together, the picture looks something like this. Interruptions happen when the listener's brain loses its prediction of where you are going, or when the signal arrives too late, or when the conversation starts to feel one-directional. None of those are fixed by speaking louder or faster. They are fixed by moving the point earlier, signaling the structure clearly, keeping setups tight, and leaving room for the other person to feel like they are still part of the exchange. The fascinating thing is that none of this requires a different personality or more confidence in the conventional sense. It is almost entirely about architecture. The same thought, the same idea, the same content can land completely differently depending purely on when and how it is introduced. A good idea delivered too late sounds like rambling. The same idea delivered with clear orientation sounds like someone who knows what they are talking about. And the listener never consciously notices the difference. They just experience one version as easy to follow and the other as something they felt compelled to interrupt. If you enjoy understanding how things work beneath the surface, there is plenty more to explore here. Subscribe to keep following these ideas, and feel free to share this with someone who loves thinking about how communication actually works.